session is rainbow, and we see many of you in different colors, so that's very nice to see you. The reason why we've said rainbow is to signify equality and leaving no one behind in sustainable development. We all know that young people are not a homogeneous group, but young people are all a heterogeneous group coming from different backgrounds, including sex, gender, ethnicity, nationality, socioeconomic status. And until every young person is empowered, the goal of sustainable development will not be achieved. And this is the theme for today, and that is why we are wearing a rainbow color theme. Some of the technical and logistical announcements. We have also seen that some of you are having certain language barriers. So that's okay. You can communicate in your local language with us, especially in the call to action sessions that are happening post the plenary. You can talk, and then we will all figure out how we are going to work that out. There is translation also, but language should not stop you from participation. The other announcement we wanted to make is, as soon as you have registered, you've gotten a link to attend this forum, and that link is the link that you will use for all the 3 days. So don't worry about looking out for a link each day. So the link that you get on day 1 is the link that you will be using. Yesterday, we've also seen that, there was this in the chat that some of you wanted to create WhatsApp groups. We thoroughly do not encourage that. And on behalf of the co-convenors, we are committed and we are responsible for data protection. And that's the reason why we do not recommend any formation of any unofficial WhatsApp groups. And also, there have been certain events that some of the members have been promoting. What we would say is, please send that event details to us, and then we can email it to all the participants in a proper manner. So those are some of the announcements we wanted to make for today. And let's get started on today with a recap. And I invite the Youth Lead team to take us through that.
Hi, everyone. So a very good morning and welcome to the second day of the Asia Pacific Forum for Sustainable Development 2022. I'm Ashwini Lama and I am from the Y-PEER Asia Pacific Center. So I'll be taking you through a recap for yesterday. So we had welcome yesterday by the co-conveners and a very young participant who set the tone for the 3 days with their enthusiasm to work for SDGs in their own capacity. We then had opening remarks from UNESCAP and other agencies to speak about the youth action at the APFSD, the overview of progress made in previous APFSD, and the youth call to action. We also had many of you asking questions that were important and thought-provoking. And with this, we moved on with a very enthusiastic mindset into the plenary session, where we ventured into the theme for the day, which was building back better from COVID-19 while advancing the full implementation of the 2030 agenda in the Asia and the Pacific, with young people at the forefront of his action. In the plenary session, there were 7 youth advocates who presented to us, speaking about their work in feminism, LGBTIQ advocacy, disability rights, migrant and refugee advocacy, climate action, and youth and adolescent advocacy. We heard about the various impacts that COVID-19 has had on their communities and their field of work. And one important thing we heard was from the Pacific, which was about how climate change has been accelerating and the sea levels keep rising, and how climate action is no longer something that we can think of putting into practice in the far future. We took the same spirit and entered the group discussion for the Youth Forum call to action development. That was when you all went into the breakout rooms. And after the breakout rooms, after a successful discussion of about 1 hour, we heard from all the groups about your recommendations. Some of these recommendations were about creating more digital opportunities and focusing on bridging the gap, the internet resources gap, also about including multiple stakeholders' participation in SDGs, including the marginalized community, and safeguarding the basic needs for young people like food, education, shelters, and job opportunities. With that, we ended the first day of the APFSD, where we talked about COVID-19, building back better with youth at the forefront. And today we will focus on the theme quality education and gender equality, advancing the SDGs from the young people's perspective while building back better from COVID-19. So that is a brief recap of the day yesterday. So before we go on to the plenary session today, I would like to request that we take a group photo, if that's okay with you. If you could kindly open your cameras and we can take a quick group photo before we begin today's session. So thank you.
Get back to Newcastle final game next weekend. That's against Gold Coast. The double header at Suncorp. Well done to you. Header.
Looks like her ankle got covered again. It's a real shame. She'll just come back.
I'm sorry, I don't have a rainbow color from my background.
Our team, are we done taking the picture? There's a lot of comments asking.
Done taking the picture. And we hope everybody is able to hear us. Okay, so now let's just get started. Let's just get started on the session for today. And the first session that we are going to start off with is the session on quality education. And the session moderators are Lucky from Y-PEER as well as me. And in this session, we will be understanding the progress and youth actions thus far around Goal 4 on inclusive, equitable, quality education, lifelong learning opportunities for all. And we will also be focusing on comprehensive sexuality education. Without much ado, I will hand over to my colleague Lucky to introduce our very eminent speakers, our resource persons who have been very supportive of the APFSD Youth Forum for many years, especially Dr. Joe, who has been there in this journey with us from the beginning. So thank you, Dr. Joe, and thank you, Janelle, for being with us and addressing the participants. Over to you, Lucky, to moderate the session.
Thank you, Sai. Well, in the first segment of our second day of APFSD's plenary session, we have experts, as said by Sai, from UNESCO and UNFPA regional office, who will be taking us through the quality education inclusive of CSE and out of CSE. So may I now take this opportunity to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Janelle. Ms. Janelle is an advisor on education for health and well-being, working with UNESCO office based in Bangkok. She has been working with UNESCO office for more than 15 years in the area of HIV prevention, education, CSE and school, CSE, school and young people health and well-being, and she has led the projects in implementation of UNESCO's strategy in education for health and well-being. Ms. Janelle, may I now invite you to share us about an overview of the progress, gaps and challenges that are being faced towards the achievement of SDG goal 4 in the region and avenue for young people's engagement. Thank you for joining us, and over to you, Janelle.
Thank you, Lucky. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you. Thank you so much for extending the kind invitation to UNESCO to be here today. Let me just try and bring up my presentation. I hope one of the organizers will let me know when you can see my screen. Is that visible? Yes, I got a thumbs up. We also have some background ambient noise. Okay, great, perfect. So my name is Janelle. I am delighted to be here, and I've been asked to share a bit on the status of SDG 4 in this region. And the content that I'm taking for today's presentation is actually coming from the SDG 4 goal profile, which is already publicly available on the ESCAP website. And I believe the conveners have sent this to all of you, and I do hope that you've had the opportunity to take a look at it. It's only 16 pages, but I say only like this because it's very dense content. And I'm sad to say that in the short time available, I'll only be able to give you a high-level snapshot, and do encourage you to take a moment and read through when you get the chance, the full content. And this goal profile will be presented for stakeholder debate on 29th of March on the roundtable on SDG 4. So first, a high-level sort of snapshot summary of the paper overall and its key messages. Access to and participation in education continue to increase in the Asia-Pacific region. However, delivery of quality education remains a challenge at every level of the system. To reach the most disadvantaged and vulnerable, multi-sectoral strategies need to be in place to address learners' intersecting needs around learning, protection, well-being, and more. Teachers play a key role in improving learning outcomes, which accentuates the need to emphasize their training, their professional development, and their support. It is important to address the COVID-19 exacerbated learning crisis and the learning lost as a result of extended school closures and interrupted learning. It is equally essential to ensure sufficient education expenditure to get back on track to achieve SDG 4. Another challenge in this region is the need to address the current lack of comprehensive, good quality data in education systems. Now, a little bit closer look at the current status. COVID-19 has impacted national and regional development tremendously, including in education. An estimated 10.71 million learners from Asia and the Pacific were at risk of not returning to care centers, schools, or universities once they have reopened. Even with technology-supported remote learning approaches, there has been a reduction in learning hours and learning quality, with many of the most vulnerable and marginalized still left behind. Long-term effects of the pandemic on SDG 4 include cost, human capital accumulation, development prospects, and welfare. When we look at the progress and challenges prior to the pandemic, however, now given the diversity of countries' social and economic conditions across the region, the progress and the challenges, of course, differs. So we have the trends, but we know that we have the uniqueness between and within countries. We have seen overall progress trends in terms of completion rates of primary and lower secondary education and early childhood enrollment. 89% of children in this region are enrolled in programs at least 1 year before they enter primary level. There's been progress in tertiary education, again a variation that I'll speak to shortly. Literacy and numeracy skills are overall highest among the younger population, and most teachers have minimum qualification, although we acknowledge that is not a measure of the quality of their preparedness. Challenges remain, as we've noted. Completion and learning achievement at secondary level is still a problem for some countries, and we seem to not be on target for eliminating disparities in education and providing inclusive and responsive facility support overall in terms of gender and other vulnerabilities. It's also worth noting that there are very limited data on this particular area. There is a large neglect of technical and vocational education and training. And even in terms of other post-secondary education, the data suggests that in half of Asia Pacific countries, only 1 in 3 young people are enrolled in university. Information and communication technology, ICT skills for employment, decent jobs, and entrepreneurship is low overall in this region. There is a limited disaggregated data to track or really comment on equity and gender equality, combined with a lack of reporting on key targets relating to non-cognitive education, such as global citizenship education, education for sustainable development, and learner well-being. Still looking at the current status, and we see that what requires attention, equity and inclusion, especially of children from vulnerable and marginalized communities, education quality, learning achievements on basic numeracy and literacy and 21st century skills lag behind. There's a lack of relevant curricula, appropriate pedagogy, and adequately qualified and supported teachers. Looking at skills for work and lifelong learning, the Asia Pacific region remains home to more than 37% of the world's illiterate youth and almost 60% of the world's illiterate adults. Global citizenship education, education for sustainable development, and learner well-being, as we just mentioned, lack reporting data. When we think about digital learning, we acknowledge the gender digital divide, and the geographical divides around this access. Quality data and systematic monitoring, there is a lack of data on key SDG 4 indicators with limited disaggregation. In terms of learning outcome assessment, we lack internationally comparable data, and school health and nutrition programs that really do require urgent investment. And here we're talking about water, sanitation, and hygiene, wash in schools, school feeding, school health services, including psychosocial counseling, and life skills-based health education, including CSE, comprehensive sexuality education. When we look at human rights and gender equality considerations, in terms of parity, access, and achievement, overall, there has been considerable progress made in achieving gender parity at all levels of education. We know the pandemic, though, has had a devastating effect, particularly on women and girls. Child marriage remains a problem and potentially exacerbated during the pandemic. The risks of an estimated 4.5 million girls dropping out of school in South Asia include approximately 400,000 adolescent pregnancies, which of course further hinder girls' return to school. And gender transformative teaching and learning receives inadequate attention. When we look at education in emergencies, refugee children are twice as likely to be out of school as other children, and their access to education can further be constricted by natural and other disasters and emergencies. Violence against educational facilities, students, and personnel exists in some countries in this region, although there have been some positive steps to protect education schools from attack. Some promising innovations that we'd like to highlight. In the interest of time, I'll just zoom in on one, which is this last one you see on screen, which is the Learning Passport, which is a digital platform for learning continuity, really sort of scaled up during COVID-19, but we want to see this, of course, become innovation that's more systematized beyond the pandemic. And this is a child-friendly e-learning platform with textbooks, storybooks, songs, other types of learning materials, including built-in assessments. Timor-Leste is the first country to implement this in 2020, and it's reached already 25,000 children. So we have some challenges, but we also have innovations, and we want to zoom in about what solutions are working and how to transport and scale these up. Some last thoughts as I wrap up in terms of priorities for action on SDG 4. Slow progress in reaching SDG 4 targets in the region and impacts of COVID-19 call for prioritizing actions that accelerate learning with quality and system-level transformation to improve resilience and efficiency. you'll see on the screen 7 key priorities with their associate policy recommendations. And these will actually further be elaborated in an upcoming June conference on education. And they're grouped under 3 broad areas here. The first, learning recovery and addressing the learning crisis, with a strong emphasis on equity and strengthening teacher capacity and the support that they need to deliver and respond to the challenges of education. The second broad area, priorities 3 through 5, relate to transforming education systems. And here we're talking about flexible learning modalities and creating stronger linkages with the different parts of the ecosystem around young people that support their learning. And the last category, priorities 6 and 7, relate to increased and better investment in education and enablers for transforming both the quality and the content of education and education systems. And we're talking here about financial investments alongside improved and robust monitoring and data systems. In my last slide, I have been asked to say a little something about avenues for youth engagement, but honestly, I would much rather listen to you and what you have to say about that in terms of what has and hasn't been working well and where there's room for improvement on opportunities and making those opportunities meaningful and equitable. In this virtual room, we have so many young people who are experts, practitioners, implementers, advocates working at all levels of SDG 4 implementation, from community level straight through to intergovernmental policy and level dialogue. And a lot of examples exist, and you can tell me more and share with each other around these at all of these different levels. But just by way of information sharing, I want to just point to 2 milestone events that's on the calendar. Of course, the conversations around what's needed for SDG 4 don't end with this conversation, with the ECOSOC Youth Forum, with the high-level political forum. There's also another meeting in June convened by my office that's bringing together education ministers to discuss the trajectory of SDG 4 in this region. And young people's engagement will be critical to those discussions. And we've already started to reach out. Many of the youth networks engage in this space and the co-convenors of this meeting to support that. And also in September of this year, the UN Secretary General is convening a global summit on transforming education. And the lead up to that will also involve national and regional consultation, again, including with young people. The summit is described as one that is intended to be youth-driven. UNESCO is a secretariat for this global event. So I will stop there, and I'm happy to continue the conversations in the discussion that follow.
Well, thank you so much, Janelle, for sharing the detailed report and information on what's happening at the regional level. I'm sure most of our young people here are oriented and are made aware of what the office has been doing in order to ensure quality education. As per the highlight, it has been said that every advantage has its own disadvantage. And if we look into the impact of COVID-19, it has impacted in quality of delivering the quality education a lot. But there are so many things happening behind in order to ensure that no one is left behind and the quality of education is delivered. So thank you so much. And I'm sure some 374 participants in this hall is made aware of what the UNESCO office is actually doing in order to ensure everyone gets the quality education. And I'm also very much delighted to learn that UNESCO office has prioritized some of the areas that requires attention, and that's quite interesting and heartwarming to learn.
Lucky, you are muted.
Yes, sorry. So thank you so much for sharing us all the information along with some of the challenges and also on highlighting the priorities and highlights of the actions. So thank you so much. So now may I invite Dr. Joe, our second expert, to share us about the progresses, gaps and challenges that are being faced in the region. So Dr. Joe is a medical profession working in the field of SIHR for more than 20 years. And Dr. Joe is currently working with UNFPA regional office as a technical advisor in adolescent and youth. So Dr. Joe, may I now invite you to share us on the progress towards quality education with the focus on CSE and how young people can effectively engage in the SDG 4 implementation at regional and national level in Asia Pacific. Over to you, Dr. Joe.
Thank you, Lucky. I'll just share my screen. There we are. Okay, is that okay for everyone? Great. Okay, so good morning to everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the Asia Pacific region. The topic for this presentation is progress towards CSE in Asia Pacific region, and I'll be presenting mainly from our joint work, UNFPA, UNESCO and IPPF, reviewed CSE in the region, and this is published in the report Learn, Protect, Respect and Empower. And we'll share the link for that later. So in this presentation, we'll discuss what is comprehensive sexuality education, and then go through the main findings of the review, looking at progress in the region, focusing on the key issues, the laws and policies supporting CSE, the curriculum, teacher preparedness, monitoring, and importantly, inclusiveness for all young people. And then briefly look at some of the recommendations. So firstly, for those of you who aren't so familiar with comprehensive sexuality education, or CSE for short, it's an extremely important element of children and adolescents education. It goes far beyond what was previously known as sex education. So it covers social and emotional skills that are required for relationships, for gender equality, for health and well-being. And you can see on the right the 8 key concepts that should be included in comprehensive sexuality education. And the programming for CSE needs to be age appropriate, but starting at age 5 or even before, as it does in some regions, and it's adapted to the age and the development of the child or the learner. There are many misconceptions of CSE still out in the community. The facts are that empowered young people, children and adolescents, to have the skills that enable them to make decisions about their lives. And we have evidence that it will delay the onset of sex and reduce unsafe sex, leading to reductions in adolescent pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections. So a little bit more about the review. The joint survey covered 30 countries in the region, and it reviewed national laws and policies and also surveyed ministries of education, experts, and young people. So in the review of national laws and policies, while most countries have reference to sexual and reproductive health education or HIV education in their policies, there's only 2 countries in the region, the Philippines and Thailand, that actually have laws that mandate comprehensive sexuality education. Looking at government commitment to CSE, across the region it varies, with approximately 2/3 of countries allocating budget to implementation of comprehensive sexuality education. In nearly half of the countries in the region, CSE is not a mandatory part of the curriculum. And in practice, this means that it's much less likely to be implemented in schools if it's not mandatory. The delivery approach of CSE across the region also varies. In only 1/4 or less of the countries was CSE a standalone subject or incorporated in just one subject, such as health education. Having CSE integrated across several subjects in the curriculum risks not having all components covered well by trained teachers. In 12 out of 27 countries, sexuality education was not introduced into schools in early childhood. We know now that particularly gender norms are formed very early, so it's important to have this gender positive education from age 5 to meet many of the SDG goals, but particularly SDG 5. The review also showed that topics are not introduced early enough to meet the needs of young people. 44% of girls and 45% of boys in the online survey had not received enough information about menstruation or wet dreams before they experienced them for the first time. When the survey looked at the topics covered in the CSE curriculum, unfortunately, none of the countries in the Asia-Pacific region covered all aspects of the 8 concepts outlined in the International Technical Guidance of Sexuality Education. The review found that a minority of primary schools and only slightly 1/3 of secondary schools had curricula that were fairly comprehensive, covering most of the components of CSE. An important issue is that even when CSE is included in the curriculum, teachers are not equipped to teach topics and skip the more sensitive areas or the more complex areas, such as building social and emotional skills. For example, as we see here, young people want to know the soft skills, how to negotiate and how to establish respectful relationships. So teacher training is essential to ensure that we have accurate and quality education delivered in a safe environment. Teachers should feel adequately prepared and supported to teach sexuality education and have access to materials and resources. While 2/3 of the countries are providing sexuality education teacher training, either pre-service or in-service to teachers, we really don't have enough information about the quality and the content of classroom teaching. However, we do hear from young people that in practice, in school, CSE is often not taught well. Only 28% of young people in the online survey felt that CSE was taught well or somewhat well. And we think that probably the respondents in the survey were being quite generous to their teachers, saying it was somewhat well. The review looked at how CSE was also monitored in the education system. And while the Pacific performed somewhat better, in Asia, only 1/4 of countries included CSE in the education monitoring system. Looking at the needs of vulnerable young people, very few countries in Asia and the Pacific region specifically address vulnerable populations in their sexuality education curricula. LGBTI young people with disabilities, refugees and migrants, and Indigenous young people in the region did not feel that their needs were being met. So looking at recommendations, we have seen that CSE is increasingly on the agenda in most countries, but there's still a long way to go. And the review contains many important recommendations on how we in the Pacific need to take forward CSE to meet the needs of young people. So these include the laws and policies supporting inclusion of CSE as a mandatory subject, and also planning to meet the needs of out-of-school young people, because there are many young people who are not in school. We also need to ensure that the curriculum is comprehensive, as we saw many gaps in this area. We also need to have a stronger enabling environment including the involvement of community and links to sexual and reproductive health services. And importantly, and perhaps most importantly, supporting teachers so that they have the skills and confidence to teach CSE well. And finally, I'm just wondering, can we just take a moment to reflect on whether you yourself received comprehensive and good quality sexuality education when you were young? If you did, can you just raise your hand? Okay, I see a few. So I think if you were lucky enough to have CSE, but also if you were in the majority who did not receive CSE, it's our responsibility to ensure that young children who are just entering the education system or who may not even be in school receive this fundamental knowledge and skills. So joint advocacy by young people would be incredibly powerful in convincing policymakers that CSE is the right of every child. So to support your advocacy, this page and this link contains a link to the report, to fact sheets and to videos, both a longer video and short videos that you can use even in your family or in your community or with policymakers if you have the opportunity to advocate for comprehensive sexuality education. And this is the list of the films. And thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Joe. And I'm sure through this report shared by Dr. Joe, most of us who have been thinking that I have a good knowledge on CSE is wrong, because it looks like most of us are half filled with information, especially myself. I thought that I have good information about CSE, but it looks that the knowledge that I have or the information that I have isn't enough. This is all because the research particularly found out that most of the countries, most of the young people in most of the countries are not receiving good information or good knowledge on CSE, either by themselves or either by policies. However, it has been shared by Dr. Joe that the country office remains committed in ensuring that all of us get what's need to be delivered, and in order to ensure that everyone gets quality of education, specifically on CSE aspects, UNFPA country is committed to. So with this, thank you so much, Dr. Joe, for sharing us the progress report on quality of education with focus to CSE. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing the detailed information. So with this, may I now pass the mic to my co-moderator, Ms. Sai. Over to you, Sai.
And if the participants are having any questions, put it in the chat so that Janelle and Dr. Joe can respond. At the same time, I think if we have some time towards the end of the session, we can also have a Q&A session. So, but also thank you, Janelle, where you were actually talking about this progress in the region. Also pointing out to the nuances, because overall when we see, it is said that the progress towards the goal 4 on education is slow. And especially when it comes to access, it is almost in the reversal. So the pointing out to these different nuances has actually, I think, helped all the youth participants to have a better understanding of what is happening with regards to goal 4. And at the same time, yesterday we discussed about the youth call to action that came out in 2017. And in that, we actually, the young people had asked for increased investments, and actually a significant proportion of the amount to be contributed in the national budgets for the education sector. So we see that this is also something that is being promoted. And then together, I think as young people and as UN agencies and as governments, we can ensure that investments in education keep going on, especially this year when the goal focus is on quality education. Thank you, Janelle. And also for Dr. Joe, it is quite sad to know that none of the countries in the Asia and the Pacific region are focusing on all aspects of the ITGSE concepts. I think just after this session, we will be also launching a regional campaign on CSE. So I think these are some of the efforts that all of us together will contribute in order to ensure the CSE is being mainstreamed in education. The next part of the session is around our youth solution speakers. Because not everything is so gloomy, and we have young people who are actually creating change on the ground, and we are actually very happy to share with you some of the youth solution speakers and their actions on the ground. We have our first solution speaker, and that's Alexis, and Alexis will be focusing on the work that Alexis is contributing towards SDG 4 Youth Platform. And Alexis is a teacher, and a teacher who has been working towards pro-student policies, and we have a lot to learn from Alexis. So over to you, Alexis, to share your work.
Mabuhay, everyone. I am Alexis, and I am from the Philippines. I am the member of the Interim Council of the SDG 4 Youth Network. Around the world, young people are driving change, claiming fundamental freedom and rights, improving conditions for themselves and their communities, and opportunities to learn, work, and participate in decisions that affect them. The SDG 4 Youth Network is a youth-led platform established to strengthen dialogue and revitalize partnerships between youth leaders and key education stakeholders at the high-level steering committee on SDG 4. Launched by UNESCO, the network provides a shared platform to enhance peer-to-peer learning, capacity building, and collaboration amongst members across the globe. The network was born out of the recognition that young people are key partners and actors in creating better future through education and in countries and their communities, and should have equal right and seat in the decision-making table. Pioneered last November 2021, the network has implemented various campaigns and fora and represented youth in various fora. So first, to cite, the network was able to launch a social media campaign during the International Day of Education. Dubbed as Youth Voices for Education, hundreds of network members showcase their solutions in response to educational challenges through social media and videos. And the social media campaign has sparked dialogue between youth leaders towards shared solutions and has also gotten the attention of the UN Youth Envoy. On the same day and celebration, select network members attended the Solidarity Circle Changing Course Transforming Education with Youth. It is a dialogue between high-level representatives about youth and student issues and challenges in education and aspirations for transforming education. And as a result, a global youth statement was produced, and select youth members were considered to be part of the Transforming Education Summit Advisory Committee, which will ensure youth representation and participation in the Transforming Education Summit in 2022. And of course, youth members were also attended the inaugural Sherpa group meeting. It is a discussion between the high-level steering committee to contribution to the high-level political forum thematic review on SDG 4 and strategic thematic focus areas to mobilize global cooperation. And currently, the network is establishing structurally its organization by accepting new members soon. So I am a youth leader and a student leader in a small town in the Philippines, and being part of the network made me realize that as much as we work directly in our communities, we must also ensure that our issues, challenges, and aspirations are heard and considered by decision makers, whether they are school administrators, local officials, education ministers, or national officials, as every decision made will significantly impact us and our ability to attain systemic change. I encourage you to be proactive, write letters to leaders, propose solutions and policies, as well as engage in discussions. We must never be afraid to speak up, as no one knows our situation better than us. Now more than ever, we, the youth, must amplify our voices and take up space. Thank you so much.
And thank you for sharing your work. It's quite inspirational for all the young people to see this. Our next speaker is Sopana Chin. And Sopana Chin is from Cambodia and working on this program called BEEP. And BEEP is Basic Education Equivalency Program. And I will hand over to Sopana to talk about this whole initiative and what you're doing. Over to Sopana.
Thank you, Madam, for having me. And also, first of all, I'd like to introduce myself a little bit. I am Sopanya from Cambodia, and I am the former intern of UNESCO Cambodia working in the BEEP project. So first of all, I'd like to see how many of you being cared and advocate for education. Please raise your hand. I really want to see. Yes. And thank you. Here is so much amount of participants who is care about it. So you're gonna be interested in my session. So for me, I have no slide to present because I think like I will share a little bit about what is BEEP to you. Yes, but it's just the a brochure that you all can understand about BEEP clearly. But in overall, I will present it more in here. Yes. So for me, as the young people and the one who is very interested in education since I was young, I am willing to join for every program who is associated with education. For me, the reason that I participate in BEEP because I think like BEEP can have lots of dropout people in the past of Cambodia, because Cambodia gone through a lot of conflict and also past difficulty that lead people to drop out from education, basically from primary education and secondary education. So all of those drop out, they can learn the certificate program, and they can learn just org, and they also can gain one certificate equivalent to national grade 12 exam, where they can pursue for highly technical high school and also for other vocational training, where they can leverage their skill and find the skill focused job to generate their income. Here is one of the basic achievement that BEEP have done so far. And for BEEP, they focus more on several subjects like physics, mathematics, chemistry, Khmer language, and also entrepreneurship, which is very important for all of those to have. And also BEEP also as well associated with a factory worker, because factory workers somehow they are illiterate, so they also need a space for them to learn and interpret and learn the letter and like literacy for them to have, and also they can build up themselves as well through this. And for achievement BEEP so far, BEEP have made the impact variously in Cambodia. And in Cambodia, there are 26 BEEP learning centers represent each province of Cambodia as the 26 provinces in Cambodia. And also, we have now in the third year, and we have gained 997 in registry to learn, and 600 of them graduated so far for BEEP as the data. And also 45% of them, they can get the job from the BEEP learning program, and also they can have the skill, and they also can be the alumni and be the teacher for sustaining the program to run more. as the young people, I really encourage not only young people, but also people who know themselves that they are like in need of education. They have less education. They want to join. Please join in BIP, because like BIP is the platform to gather, and we are humble to serve people and get them education to make them have the better quality of life. And we also work 3 municipal, there's lots of TVET and VTC, vocational training center, that they deserve, who are in need of workers, to make sure that they are able to apply for the job after of education. And also we have career counseling and about the difficulty where they cannot access to it, to make sure that they can well serve, and also they can well discuss on how to pursue more on deep learning program. Yes, and I believe like deep not only serve people in Cambodia, but we also seek for collaboration from international partners as well. And yes, I hope to see all of you keep passionating more about it and joining us together and advocating with us together. And here's our information, contact information you can find on a big Facebook page like Basic Education Equivalency Program. And here's our contact information, so you can find it and you can keep contacting with us. And thank you.
Okay, thank you, Supana. Thanks for that presentation, and especially when we see that in the region, the data is showing that access to education is still a problem. I think what you have presented as a work that you're doing, I think this is a great contribution, and I think the other young people will learn from this and see what they can do in their respective contexts. Our next speaker is an adolescent, and this adolescent person is doing tech innovation in education, and we are very happy to have Prim Rajasurang with us to talk about the initiative and the technology innovation that she is working towards. Over to you, Prim.
Okay, thank you. Can I share screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sofana, can you stop sharing your screen?
Can you see the screen now? Like,
Supana, can you stop share? Huh.
okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Rajasirang Wongkasamongkun. I'm Prim, and I'm 15 years old in KISP, Phuket, Thailand. And today I will be talking about how Thai TTS, or Thai Text-to-Speech, could promote the inclusive and equity education, aligning with SDG 4. First of all, we would like to talk about literacy ability in Thailand. The statistics shows that over 40% of Thai students in primary school doesn't have literacy abilities, and this is very worrying. So we would like to provide equal access to all levels of education, including the disabilities, patient, poor, aging, and children in all vulnerable situations from everywhere. Furthermore, we would like to improve the level of proficiency in functional literacy for all. And what is Thai Text-to-Speech, or Thai TTS, is where we have implemented an artificial intelligence model that you can input the whole text in and transfer it into speech, where this means that it could save your time because we can learn and enhance knowledge from listening to audible books, or you're multitasking or you're working, which would bring to more job possibilities, where it opens a whole world of opportunities for you to get more information while doing other work as well. And this will promote lifelong learning, where aging population tends to have better memory and be more engaged and learn better while listening, because we have different voices that allow in text to speech for in Thai. This means that they would have a better education for all. And then we are promoting, and it's for free, because the audiobook, it could create it faster, easier, and cheaper, promoting the free book, and this will lead to equality, where we have equal education for people with disabilities. We are promoting inclusive and equitable education in all levels of education for persons with disabilities. And then what we are thinking of in the future of Thai TTS, where the future of Thai TTS could be applied, that we can have a text-to-speech to ensure inclusive and education for all. This means that we can have interesting lessons. Do you want to learn physics with Einstein? Like, we can do something like this, or hello, my name is Einstein. But we're having that using GAN and TTS technology, Einstein could come to life, like in the video.
Life already experienced the mysteries of aging and death. Now I am an artificial intelligence.
By having an artificial intelligence teachers, this means that it would improve quality education for children in like autism, because they like some teachers, and if they learn with Einstein or some heroes that they like, or Marie Curie, they could have a better and equitable education for them. And in the future, if there is like a metaverse education, text-to-speech could come into a play in an important role, because it allows robotic teacher to happen. This means that we could have a fascinating way of learning using metaverse or VR that we can enjoy and access every moment, everywhere, every time, in all sorts of ways. And this would lead to a better life quality for SDG 1, 5, 8, 9, and 10. And also, I would like to invite you all to come and join us to be innovative about skills and in the technology that could apply into your areas and develop a better life, better skill, and everything for all. Thank you
for sharing your innovation. I think this is quite interesting. We will then now move to Shreya Shrestha. Shreya Shrestha will be presenting to us some of the work that YUVA is doing. YUVA based in Nepal, and YUVA is working towards transformative education, transformative leadership, including comprehensive sexuality education. So over to you, Shreya.
Thank you, Sai. Good morning, everyone. I am honored to be speaking in this 9th APFSD Youth Forum along with an amazing group of young leaders, innovators, and distinguished delegates and panelists. My name is Shreya Shrestha, and I'm currently associated as the SRHR Program Coordinator at YUVA based in Kathmandu, Nepal. YUVA is a youth-led, youth-run organization that has been working to promote youth participation through empowerment and advocacy since its establishment in 2009. We are currently working on the thematic areas of active citizenship, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and a cross-cutting research unit. YUVA sees empowerment not only from a rights perspective, but also in terms of values, personal as well as professional growth. Through our programs like the Center for Youth Studies and the Center for Gender and Sexuality Studies, we are capacitating young people with the soft skills necessary for them to build their leadership qualities and improve their critical thinking as well as life skills. Beyond our program, youth leadership is woven into the fabric of our organization. Our leading body, the Executive Board, consists of young people who transform leadership every 2 years. YUVA believes that with adequate opportunities, learning platforms, and spaces, young people are capable of being leaders on all levels, and that a diverse youth leadership is imperative for us, for society to move forward. YUVA for the past 10 years have been actively working in the sector of SRHR, with comprehensive sexuality education being one of our priority areas. As an intersectional feminist, I strongly believe CSE to be an effective tool for transformative change. Comprehensive sexuality education is the crossroad where education and health meet. It is vital to advancing health outcomes and gender equality, and provides young people the tools they need to have to live healthy lives and relationships. It helps them to navigate life-changing decisions about their sexual and reproductive health and more. CSE is life-saving knowledge and a life-changing tool. So it doesn't matter what we call it. Comprehensive sexuality education is about relationships, human rights, and gender equality. It is about culture, society, and sexuality, about opposing violence and staying safe. CSE is about developing life skills such as critical thinking, communication and negotiation, about self-development, self-confidence, and decision-making. It is about taking responsibility and showing empathy. It nurtures positive attitudes and values, including open-mindedness, respect for oneself and others, and a positive attitude towards sexual and reproductive health and well-being. These are all fundamental values and skills everyone needs, especially young people. CSE follows a human rights-based and a gender transformative approach. It is culturally relevant and context-appropriate, transformative, develops self-efficacy, and thus an important factor in consideration for the achievement of Goal 4 of the Agenda 2030. Thank you.
And since the beginning, we have seen the youth solution speakers talking about how through their work, they are ensuring that quality education is provided, inclusive education is provided, innovation and technology is provided in order to ensure education is received. And last but not the least, but also comprehensive sexuality education, which is very key, and it needs to be included and it needs to be mainstreamed in education. And we have our next speaker, Ray, and Ray is going to talk about leaving no one behind through the program of Power of Youth. And Ray is going to speak about this initiative that is running in Indonesia. Over to you, Ray.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sai. I'm going to share my screen first. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Sai, and it's a pleasure to be here and meet all of the panelists. I'm so excited about today's session of APFSD 2022. And hello, everyone. Hello, participants. My name is Ray, and I'm the project manager of Power to Youth, a program that focuses on preventing child marriage, teenage pregnancy, and SGBV in Indonesia. The prevention of such harmful practices enable children and young people to continue education and control in their life. Talking about my work to address the goal for and quality education and inclusive education made me reflect to our current program of Power to Youth, but I believe that it will be more related to our previous program at Rutgers Indonesia, especially the Yes I Do program that focuses on similar issues with my current program. And it is funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. I spent more or less 1.5 years living in West Lombok district in West Nusa Tenggara, and I had to witness how CSE is the crossroads at which education and health meet and can lead to advancing the health outcomes and gender equality. It gives young people the tools that need to have a healthy life and relationship, and it helps them navigate the life-changing decisions about their sexual and reproductive health. The implementation of CSE in Indonesia is actually in line with the target 4.7 that mainly expect by 2030 all learners have to acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development. It includes the issues of human rights, gender equality, promotion of culture and peace and nonviolence, and appreciation of cultural diversity. And CSE covers all of the issues mentioned above. On this occasion, I will share with you about CSE implementation within the junior high school in a more rural context of Indonesia. But when we talk about CSE, we should be more aware of how Indonesia's context can be one of the obstacles in implementing it. The idea of CSE, its nature being taboo and sensitive, continues to limit discussions and teaching among people, let alone adolescents. It may jeopardize the status quo where adolescents are restricted to accessing needed services and information to lead a healthy and productive life. However, the teachings of Setara module, the Semangat Dunia Remaja, or the spirit of adolescence, try to counter that narrative. We realize that Setara positively impacts how adolescents are getting more aware of their bodily autonomy. In some circumstances, it creates a collective understanding of preventing harmful practices towards adolescents, especially girls. I'm going to share with you what it means and how it happened. However, as a disclaimer, I might say that the in-school teaching did not solely establish the good practice on Setara implementation. It was complemented by the out-school services conducted by Community Health Center or Puskesmas in Indonesia, mainly delivered by midwife, and monthly community discussion on specific topics related to harmful practices. The Setara module encourages more young people, more adolescents to be aware of where to go if they happen to become the victims of harassment or forced to get married early or any other harmful practices. They also become more aware if the same things happened to their surroundings, including their peers or family. Specific chapters in Setara are dedicated to discussing the referral system in school and community and services they can access that have been adolescent and youth-friendly. However, the underlying argument here is that throughout the Setara learning process, adolescents are aware that they have the power and agency to make choices without fear of violence or coercion or having someone else decide for them, be it families, societies, or even government. And I'm going to show this video, but this is the background of that. And this notion of power and agency in achieving awareness of bodily autonomy itself is really important. Setara successfully contributes to adolescents having knowledge about and embracing the changes in their bodies and emotions brought on by puberty. Adolescents feel more comfortable with their physical selves and more normal, quote unquote, when talking about puberty. They attributed this change to the fact that the topic became more educational rather than taboo. The pedagogic method of Setara and its comprehensive material has equipped adolescents with knowledge and the capacity to know when their autonomy is denied or when they are stripped of their rights to live free from violence and enjoy healthy reproductive rights. Another important thing is how Setara implementation is connected with the government program to prevent child marriage. So it is not just the students who know about the risk of the child marriage, but at the same time, teachers have also stood up for the students by convincing parents not to marry the children. Overall, in conclusion, I believe that we have to continuously provide accurate information around SRHR, unbiased and respectful, to prevent any harmful practices and promote a healthy life for adolescents and young people. I also believe that implementing best practices of CSE in more places and contexts can expedite our means in achieving Goal 4 and overall SDGs, achieving inclusive and quality education for all and having a better world by 2030. Thank you, everyone, and back to you, Sai.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you. And thank you for emphasizing on comprehensive sexuality education. And I think everyone agrees that that is a core component of education that will contribute to the overall health, well-being of young people and their access to education. Before we close, since we still have some time, it'll be good if the plenary speakers, Dr. Janil and Dr. Joe, are able to give us some insights based on the questions in the chat. So over to you, Janil, if you have some concluding comments to make, and followed by that, we can now ask Dr. Joe to make those concluding comments.
Thank you, Sai. I don't know if there's any particular question you want me to respond to. There was one question about the ways in which UNESCO might be supporting young people or organizations who are especially working in non-formal. And I think we had a great example already coming out of that from BEEP in Cambodia. And that's an example. Of course, UNESCO is a specialized agency like every other UN agency where we're secretariat to the member states. And the important recollection that education is a human right and a global public good. And the first responsibility of the provision of education falls on the state. And that responsibility includes their role in bringing together, in mobilizing resources, including from private sector or other actors, including listening to the voices and the perspectives and enriching that provision with partnerships. So even though it's the responsibility of the state, that partnership element is important. We have a whole SDG on partnerships because we recognize the value of that we can't do things one without the other. And we spend a lot of time today even shining a light on comprehensive sexuality education. And as you would recall from my presentation, I use the example that that kind of education, non-cognitive education, and that element of education that's really required to make education transformative. You know, what's required around social emotional learning, around you know, those kinds of competencies for all of our lives long. This is really struggling. It's really struggling in terms of what teachers need to deliver it. It's struggling in terms of the prioritization that it gets in education systems, and it's struggling in terms of even data to monitor and to understand how well we're doing it. But this is the game changer. I mean, and we can consider all the many ways that education like this can more reach a broader cross-section of society and engage them, including through virtual and digital and other platforms. But the quality of education is so much bigger than the platform within which it's being delivered. So coming back to what are the skills that teachers have to develop, what is the quality of the content, and how much priority is it getting in education spaces, and how we can all work together and have been and being able to leverage those entry points even more concretely to shine a light on solutions and what we can learn from those solutions and how we can share and expand those solutions. So I think I'll leave it there in terms of concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Janelle. And over to Dr. Joe.
Thank you, Sai. The questions seem to be grouped around two main topics. One is disability, and I think this is an incredibly important issue, that young people with disabilities have increased needs for comprehensive sexuality education, and they're not being met at present. The issue is that, though, that there's such a diversity in the types of disability and the needs of the different young people within even the same group of disability. And so there are more and more people working on this, and particularly NGOs, civil society are doing very good work. And I think it's these examples are being collected. Our office in UNFPA in East and Southern Africa is doing a lot of work on this. So I think at the moment we're just trying to bring all these examples together, and we're learning what are the best ways to do, but there's no one size fits all. So we just have to keep reminding ourselves of the diversity of young people with disabilities. The other area was what to do in conservative environments about CSE. And I think it's best to try and find areas of commonality. And if we're talking about parents always want the best for their child. And we need to work on that basis and explain, as Janelle was mentioning, social and emotional skills are the skills that will help the young people with their education, with their work, and with their relationships. So these are commonalities that we need to build up, and we can have these topics in schools. The other issue is gender equality, that working on gender equality relationships starting from a young age strengthens the young person and strengthens the community. So I think we work with religious leaders in those contexts. There are some other areas that religious leaders find too sensitive, but often if you work closely with the religious leaders, they start to see the benefits of comprehensive sexuality education. They want to delay sexual intercourse. They want to prevent adolescent pregnancy. And we have very strong evidence that comprehensive sexuality education does both of these things, because young people have the information and they make informed decisions. They're not left ignorant and without the skills to cope with different situations. So I think it's a matter of communication and working together in these conservative environments. But I think this is where young people can actually do a lot of work, because working within your family, within the community, and up at the district level, at the provincial level, and at national level is the way that we're going to address these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joe. And I think this whole discussion around comprehensive sexuality education, because this is core for continuing education for everyone, for having access to education for everyone, and then that will put young people at stead in order to achieve their full potential and be the people they want to be, realize the dreams that they want to realize and have a great life as such. So definitely we all see comprehensive sexuality education as that linchpin and as that core to overall goal on education. And also, the region is having 60%, the region contributes to 60% of all young people in the whole world. So again, for all of us to have comprehensive sexuality education mainstreamed in our curricula, in school, out of school, and in different ways will be a great step moving forward. And all of our advocacy efforts have to be contributing to that. So in line with that, the co-conveners, ARROW, YouthLead and Y-PEER, we are strong supporters of comprehensive sexuality education. And we thought that we will also initiate a regional campaign on comprehensive sexuality education. And that is what we are going to officially launch on behalf of all the conveners, but also on behalf of all you participants. And we welcome all of you to join. So there's a short video that has been developed and over to the team to show the regional CSE campaign launch. Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women, ARROW, has been working for a long time to ensure universal access to comprehensive sexuality education, along with youth-led, youth-serving, and women-led organizations. We have used various strategies such as monitoring, research, information, communications, as well as advocacy at national, regional, and global levels to further comprehensive sexuality education implementation. We know that the Asia-Pacific region has the largest number of young people, and access to comprehensive sexuality education is a linchpin to advance sustainable development in the region. And it is the right of every young person to access accurate, evidence-based, sex-positive, and affirming sexuality education. ARROW has been working towards this. CSE for All is the regional campaign we are initiating, and we welcome you all to join.
Learning about CSE is important for the overall development of individuals. Implementation of CSE both in and out of schools is a must, and we here at the YPAP Center promote and advocate to young people so that they can further the CSE agenda in their own countries.
CSE is an effective measure for HIV prevention towards young key populations.
Through the Right Here, Right Now 2 project, we are working on the implementation of comprehensive sexuality education CSE by putting in targeted efforts that advocates for incorporation of CSE in in-school curriculums, development of a national and regional level CSE monitoring framework, and support the scale-up of existing activities in all Right Here, Right Now 2 countries in Asia. CSE is an important tool that equips young people with the necessary skills, knowledge, and attitude around their sexual and reproductive health and their rights. Using lessons from the pandemic, we aim to do more on CSE advocacy and strengthen accessibility of CSE, harnessing on the power of digital connectivity and technological advancements around us. The CSE for All regional campaign will further advance this work.
2% of the world's youth live in Asia Pacific. That is more than 750 million young people between the ages of 15 to 24. This is a vital group that will drive development and rights in our countries and in our region. In a country where child marriage, gender-based violence, gender inequality, early and unintended pregnancies, HIV, and other sexually transmitted infections still pose serious risks. To combat these issues, we need comprehensive sexuality education in empowering these young people to make informed decisions about relationships and sexuality. The regional CAC campaign aims to address these negative cancer outcomes faced by young people.
International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education, which we call ITGSC, provides guidance on designing and delivering CAC plans, policies, and programs with a major focus on gender, the impact of gender inequality, and harmful gender norms. CAC in ITGSC stands for human rights by reflecting on the broad concept of sexuality and promoting structured learning about sex and relationship in a positive, affirming, and centered on the best interest of adolescents and young people. This regional CAC for All campaign is in line with this guidance.
Hi, everyone. So right now, we also wanted to share that we have also created a website for the regional CSC campaign. As you can see here, I'm sharing how the website looks like. This is the landing page of the CSE for All website. You can see that we also have our objectives, and some more information as well on the organizers, some background information on what the campaign is all about. And I also like to call my colleague Farah now to share a little more about how you can be involved in the CSE for All campaign.
If you see here, there is a join our campaign button. So if you're interested in joining our campaign and supporting our campaign, click that button and register your interest. I will be sharing the link in the chat box. And also the website is still updating. So if there's any other further update, we will definitely be in touch with you.
Yeah, thanks, Farah. So the website, we are still developing it. We will be adding a lot more information to the website, especially some of the videos that all of you have sent in, some of the interventions that have happened throughout the APFSD Youth Forum as well. So this is a work in progress for the website. It will be developed even further. But at this point, we would like to say that if you are interested in joining, please do register your interest. As Farah mentioned, you can click on the Join Our Campaign link right at the top, and we will get in touch with you, whoever is interested. Thank you so much. Farah will also be sharing the link to the CSE for All website in the chat box as well. So please check the chat for the link to the site. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you to Fir, who had actually worked on that campaign video. Thank you to Farah and Keisha, who have put together this tech video presentation. And that's all on education. That's all on comprehensive sexuality education. And we will continue to learn more. And on that note, I would pass on to Arushi and Keisha to take us to the next session on gender equality. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sai. Welcome everyone to what we hope would be a really interesting and exciting panel on gender equality. We all know that achieving gender equality for women, girls, and gender diverse groups is critical for realizing the SDG agenda, as well as leaving no one behind. And through the medium of this panel, we are very proud and excited to share perspectives of resource persons on the region's progress with respect to SDG 5 on gender equality, as well as avenues and forums for engagement of youth advocates with respect to progress and advocacy around SDG 5. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our very first panelist for today. We've all engaged with her in different capacities over the last day and a half, but our first panelist is Sivananthi Thanentheran. Siva is the executive director at Arrow and has authored a range of regional monitoring reports on the progress governments have made towards their commitments to gender equality and SRHR in the region under the Reclaiming and Redefining Rights and series published by Arrow. Under her leadership, Arrow has expanded its work to include the intersections of sexual and reproductive health and rights and critical development issues such as climate change, migration, disabilities through the creation and development of cutting-edge and thought-provoking publications. Siva is also a She Decides champion and sits on the leadership of the Action Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights of UN Women and UNFPA's Global Advisory Council as well. I'd now like to invite Siva to share her perspective and reflections on the progress in SDG 5 within the region and the opportunities that young people have to engage in SDG 5 related work and advocacy with a specific focus on Generation Equality Forum and related avenues. Over to you, Siva.
Thanks, Arushi. Maybe we can have the PowerPoint, Mamuta. So my topic is about gender equality and generation equality and how we can try to merge, because we feel that generation equality actually kind of builds on the SDGs as well. So second slide, next slide. Okay. So what we know about gender equality is that although governments had signed on to both the Beijing Platform for Action and the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, too little has actually changed, right? And COVID-19 has exacerbated the gender inequality crisis. Across the world, we know that 640 physical and sexual violence at the hands of an intimate partner. 190 million women who wanted to avoid pregnancy did not use any contraceptive method. Women do 3 times the unpaid care work compared to men. 19%, that is 1 in 5 of every girls, are married before the age of 18. And 2/3 of the women are in the workforce compared to 90% of women, of men, which is a number that has not changed for the last 30 years, right? Apparently it will take 135.6 estimated years before women achieve equal pay or equal leadership with men. And 135 years, I guess even those of you who are young will not live to see gender equality in your lifetime unless we do something about it today. Next slide, please. Yeah, so what is gender equality? I mean, just some basic definitions is a state of equal ease of access to resources and opportunities, including economic participation and decision-making, and the state of valuing different behaviors, aspirations, and needs equally regardless of gender. So it means that women and men and girls and boys enjoy the same rights, resources, opportunities, and protections, but it does not require that girls and boys or women and men be the same to be treated exactly alike. Gender equity, gender parity are also terms that are used, but they should not be substituted for gender equality, right? Within the SDGs, gender equality is captured within SDG 5. But in reality, gender equality is also cross-cutting across all of the 17 SDGs, right? So in SDG 5 in particular, the key indicators are amongst those about ending all forms of discrimination against women, whether it's the right to property, education, political decision-making, the indicators around ending violence, which is physical, sexual, and also violent deaths, to eliminate harmful practices, which includes child and early marriage, as well as FGMC, and also in some countries, discriminative practices like chowpadi. So in ensuring universal access to SRHR, which is about contraception mainly here, and then improving legal frameworks to recognize the equality of women and girls, ensuring some form of recognition or remuneration of care work and social protection for women and girls. Okay, next slide, please. Crisis exacerbates the gender inequality. So what we have actually learned from lessons, right, from COVID, as shared in the first day, SCAP's report sheds light on how many indicators, including indicators where progress had been denoted. So if you saw those 2-3 charts that they presented, it showed that, across the region, there was quite good adherence to this basic indicator of antenatal access, right? But during COVID, even that deteriorated. There was definitely increased violence, and then the increased care burden has also been denoted. Now, what precipitates crisis? So in these 2 years of COVID-19, what we learned is the pandemic, this has been seen and recorded in all of these data that we are seeing today. But we also need to anticipate climate change, right? Because droughts and floods will actually kind of pose the same types of limitations to access to education or access to health services, and where women and girls will be severely affected more than others. The second thing we also need to think about is conflict, and conflict can be between states, as we are seeing between Ukraine and Russia, or sometimes we see in our region, sort of a passive-aggressive violence between, China, India, Pakistan, which takes place. For now, thank God it's passive-aggressive. And then, but we definitely have Afghanistan and Myanmar, right? So in Afghanistan, whether it was a Taliban takeover, or in Myanmar, because there was complete lack of democracy, right? The democracy crisis is also a sort of conflict between people's aspiration as well versus the military domination. So we have to consider, in a world of crisis, is equality possible? Because almost all stakeholders and actors will say, well, let's solve this crisis first. Let's solve the conflict before we think about gender equality. But what we would like to posit to you is that equality is a fundamental ingredient for resilient communities, right? It is imperative we recognize gender equality as a building block on building better from COVID or any other crisis that we think about. So the work on gender equality cannot be put off to tomorrow until we solve this crisis. Okay, next slide, please. So the Generation Equality Forum was actually initiated after the 25th anniversary of the BPFA. It was a multi-stakeholder global gathering. It started off in Mexico City in March and culminated in Paris in June 2021. And then there was a global acceleration plan with a series of concrete, ambitious, and reformative actions that were taking place. Next slide, please. This is like a picture of to kind of tell the journey of where the amount of work that actually went into making the Generation Equality Forum a reality. And I believe that some of you, definitely there was a youth task force to the Generation Equality Forum, and this young feminist task force is still playing a key role in the accountability and the follow-up to the Generation Equality. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the action coalitions are supposed to work to catalyze collective actions, spark global and local conversations, and drive public and private investment and deliver concrete game-changing results. And there are 6 action coalitions that were chosen. And all of these are seen to be like forward-thinking, right? Or pushing the boundaries type of issues. So there's gender-based violence, economic justice and rights, bodily autonomy and SRHR, feminist action for climate justice, technology and innovation, and feminist movements and leadership. Okay, yeah. Yes, Edwin, Beijing was where Hillary Clinton said women's rights are human rights, but, and so these are like some of the people who are in the leadership, and those of the 90 plus partners who have joined the Action Coalition leadership. You can see that there are member states, there are UN agencies, there are civil society agencies, there are definitely youth-led organizations, private companies, and philanthropies. Next slide. So for bodily autonomy and SRHR, which basically is what Aero is a co-lead of this. So we want actually all people, particularly girls, adolescents, women, transgender and gender non-binary people in all the diversity are empowered to exercise SRHR. That SRHR information, education and services are freely available. Girls, women's and feminist organizations and funds, including among others, girl and youth-led, disability-led, indigenous, LGBTQ+ human rights defenders and their allies are strengthened to advance SRHR, and more governments promote, protect and invest in SRHR, including as part of universal health coverage. Next slide, please. Yeah, so these are some of those key principles, and you can see that this is in alignment with most of what we have talked about, right? Intersectional is something that's really important because we know where the gaps are across the countries, it is felt by the most marginalized groups. And these most marginalized groups are very similar. And young people and adolescents are a completely marginalized group, especially in bodily autonomy and SRHR, because the decisions over young people and adolescents' bodies are mainly made by adults, although well-meaning, but not respecting the agency and decision-making of young people themselves. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have comprehensive sexuality education, which is a critical ingredient. As you know, within the SDGs for the longest time, I mean, the indicators on education did not include comprehensive sexuality education. So we see that, you know, the Generation Equality, this Action Coalition chose comprehensive sexuality education because we thought that this was one of the key agendas that was not articulated properly, you know, and we find that this is useful for us to adopt a focus on comprehensive sexuality education in order to move governments to do so, right? In order to move governments to provide quality CSE to all young people. And you can see that definitely that is in need, as Jo has pointed out in this one, that not one of the countries in the Asia Pacific region provides CSE as in according to the standards set by the International Technical Guidance on CSE. Next slide. Sorry. Okay, the second one is about access to contraception and comprehensive abortion services. If you look at the demographic and health surveys across all countries, you will find that the group of young people, especially girls between the age of 15 to 19 and 20 to 22 or 23, are the ones where the unmet need is the highest. This is because decisions around contraception are actually being governed by a few things, right? Because access is limited due to either in-laws interference. Those younger women are unable to access services or have permission in order to have the services, to attend the facilities or procure services for themselves. And three, there is an immense pressure on young women within marriage to prove their fertility to their in-laws, right? So, I mean, but where is that young woman's aspiration for herself? So we feel that this access to contraception is a really important criteria for young women and young people to be able to lead healthy lives, right? Because pregnancy, marriage, childbirth can hamper the other goals you have in life and until you're ready for them, right? So the other is, of course, comprehensive abortion services. Safe abortion services are a fundamental part of access to sexual and reproductive health services. And this is also, these are two things we find really critical to push forward in the region. Next slide. Okay, and the third is, of course, decision-making and bodily autonomy. And this is about a lot of the issues that we have been talking about, whether it's persons with disabilities, whether LGBTIQ persons face violence and discrimination in order to conform to the majoritarian ideas of sexuality and reproduction. And of course, also to challenge stigma, right? So how can we actually support young people's bodily autonomy by removing legal and policy barriers that limit the exercise of sexual and reproductive health and rights? Slide, please. And of course, the last is to strengthen girls, women's and feminist organizations and networks to promote and defend their right to bodily autonomy and SRHR. So all of these organizations who are here with us, this is part of SWAN to ensure that we are networking and we are well resourced in order to push forward the agenda. Next slide. Yeah, so the actions that have been chosen are actually those whom we feel will accelerate progress on SDG targets, because in the SDGs and in many of the development frameworks, there is almost always a reluctance on, an intergovernmental forum for governments to adopt some of these issues that are deemed controversial by them, right? So many of those are, for us, we feel, the outer boundary issues that will actually help create the set of rights for everybody, and these are some of those indicators. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there are commitment makers who do all of these commitments, whether they are financial advocacy, policy, or programmatic commitments. Next slide. Yeah, and this is part of what Arrow has committed to. So one is to ensure young people's access to CSC. So you know very well, for the reasons that all of the other speakers have put forward. The second one is, of course, to ensure access to safe abortion, which we also feel is something that is a gap in the Asia-Pacific region. And then the last is, of course, to end FGMC, in particular, amongst the harmful practices. And these three commitments will contribute to meet at least 3 of the targets of the Action Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and SRHR. So next slide, please. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There are also common collective actions that other Action Coalition leaders have also contributed to, and these are called collective commitments. Next slide, please. Yeah. So thus far, we have got all of these people who have joined the Action Coalition, but I feel like young people should really be invested in joining and to work with us together, as Arrow and also Y-PEER and YouthLead, to actually push forward our governments in order to ensure that gender equality is that fundamental building block in these years. Next slide. Yeah, so this is some of those commitments that have been made, right? So member states have committed this much of money, and these are some of the philanthropies who have committed this type of money. Next, but I wanted to show you this other slide. So show this next slide. Yeah, but if we look here, you can see all of the commitment makers from the different region, right? And the member states, those are governments. So if we look at governments in the region, you can see that there are 298 global, I think this is global North and Europe, right? So that's, and then you can see Africa, there's 157 commitments made by their governments. And then you have North America, and then you have Asia. And Asia is in a very small slice of 18 commitments have been made. So definitely we have to push our governments in order to commit to this agenda, right? Okay, next slide. So we as Arrow, we worked with regional and national partners to look at areas that we can move the agenda forward together. So Y-PEER, YouthLead and Arrow read a regional consultation on CSC. Outright, Justice for Sisters and Arrow read a regional consultations on gender norms change. Breakthrough India and Arrow led a regional consultation on GBV and SRHR. So for Arrow and partners, we feel that regionalization through collective action and commitment to move governments, to move CSOs towards outer boundaries of current markers of progress. So if your organization wants to be engaged, you can write to, now I didn't fill up this blank because I didn't discuss it with Sai, but anyway, to Momota, who's now finding out that she's going to be the person whom everyone's going to be writing to. But it would be great for you to write to her if you are interested, and then which area that you're interested in. I've already enlightened the 3 areas that we're working on, and we'll be more than happy to include you into those lists of the different themes. Thank you. Is there another? Yeah, so these are some of those links and resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siva. I think it's our one sort of big key takeaway from your presentation really is how gender equality, while we have a standalone goal for it, which is SDG 5, but it really intersects and integrates across the SDG agenda. And achieving gender equality is critical to achieving the entire SDG agenda. And thank you so much for providing such a comprehensive overview of the generation equality processes. And we would really urge all the youth advocates to go read up more about it and write to us in case you're interested in engaging in the generation equality related forums and processes. I would now like to introduce our next panelist, Fanny Arendt, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name right, Fanny. She's a civil society coordinator for the Access to Justice team at the UN Women Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. As the youth focal point, she's working closely with grassroots organizations in the region, especially on justice-related issues, and from a lens of intersectionality, especially in relation to youth, gender diverse groups, indigenous women, and people with disabilities. On behalf of UN Women, Fanny is also the co-chair of the Asia Pacific Interagency Network on Youth, a network that aims to increase the effectiveness of UN's work in youth development and to advance the youth agenda in the region. Fanny, thank you so much for joining us, and it's really great to have you share your perspective on progress with respect to achieving gender equality in the region, and also some of the avenues that youth advocates could engage in with respect to advocacy around SDG 5. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Could we start with having my PowerPoint on the screen? Excellent, thank you. And you did actually pronounce my name correctly, so well done. Hello everyone, it's really nice to be here today, and I look forward to listening to some of you at a later stage of this session as well. As was just mentioned, my name is Fanny Arendt. I work as a civil society coordinator for the Access to Justice team at UN Women's Regional Office for Asia Pacific. It's a very long title. And I will spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about progresses towards SDG 5, and particularly how youth can, and actually already are, leading the way forward on gender equality in the Asia Pacific region. So you can go to the next slide, please. So with the risk of being a bit repetitive of the previous speaker, I just wanted to start by just quickly setting the scene of where we are in the region linked to SDG 5, that is the gender equality level, so to speak. And that has already been mentioned. Unfortunately, there has been quite a slow progress on gender equality in the region. Just to give a few examples, women in the formal employment sector or in the labor market still earn much less than men. Women have less access to financial services than men have. Women also face particular barriers when it comes to accessing the justice system or to get remedies for crimes or violations that have been committed against them. And women are also very much underrepresented in all forms of decision-making in the region. So if we would keep the current pace of change that we're seeing at the moment, it would take more than 50 years to achieve gender parity in political participation and at least 118 years for true pay equality. So these are just a few examples of areas that still need some progress that we see in the region, but are obviously true in other parts of the world as well. And also, like the previous speaker said, many of these issues have definitely been exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic. One of those examples is violence against women, or domestic violence, which has also been called the shadow pandemic. And I'm not sure if you can actually see that on the picture of my PowerPoint, because you can see it's quite small. But what we've seen is that the reported cases, just the ones that actually where people file a report of domestic violence, increased drastically during the pandemic over the past 2 years. And again, these are just the reported ones. So obviously or most likely there are a lot of other cases that we haven't even been reported. And one of the research done in relation to domestic violence during the pandemic, which supposedly should be seen in the picture, even though it's small, is that the searches on Google or internet platforms for help services after surviving domestic violence really increased during the pandemic, including internet searches such as signs of domestic violence, how to get out of a violent relationship, etc. So based on this, we're still very far away from achieving gender equality by 2030, which is really the aim of Sustainable Development Goal 5. We can go to the next slide, please. So that's the bad side. However, in recent years, there's also a lot of evidence showing that there's increased commitment towards achieving gender equality. And that is taking place both globally and in this region. So there are a few international agreements and platforms, for instance, that aims to advance gender equality, many of which have been signed by UN member states. I know the previous speaker already discussed them, so just to quickly mention them, such as the Beijing Platform for Action and CEDAW. We also have the Generation Equality Forum, which last year took place in Paris and Mexico, which really is a forum that provides a roadmap for gender equality, and which involves basically every sector of society. It's governments and civil society actors, private sector, academia, influencers, you name it, who come together to drive urgent action and accountability on gender equality. So what can be said on this is that international frameworks and coalitions and agreements are indeed in place. We have them. And states also have a legal obligation to actually implement whatever they have signed, including conventions such as CEDAW, which aims to end all forms of discrimination against women and girls. But most importantly is that there is still a huge need of action on the ground and proper implementation of these promises that have been made by governments and other decision-making actors. And for this, youth play a very critical role. They are the drivers of change and very strong advocates on women's rights and women's empowerment. Next slide, please. So I think we can see or agree on that we see across the world that youth are leading change on a number of societal issues. Fridays for Future is an example, a global movement which is very much youth-led and which aims to address climate change issues. And in the Asia Pacific region, I also seen that youth are increasingly challenging entrenched systems of privilege, of violence, and of authority. And also that there's a very strong youth activism around gender equality in this region. And the other day, I was at this workshop that UN Women had together with human rights defenders and gender equality advocates from Asia. And there was something that was kept being mentioned during this workshop. And they said that in their context, feminism and gender equality is kind of seen as a Western concept, something that wasn't born out of or driven by the region or their countries. And I find that so interesting because I really disagree with that. I think in many instances that Asia Pacific have been ahead of Europe, for instance, when it comes to successes of gender equality. For instance, women were allowed to vote in Afghanistan way before many Western countries. I'm from Sweden, and last year, by the end of last year, we had our first woman prime minister in history. There's never been a woman leader or state leader in Sweden until last year. And we're considered to be the most gender equal country in the world. So, well, in this regard, many countries in Asia Pacific were far ahead of European countries when it comes to women in decision-making positions. So my point with this is really that feminism or progresses on gender equality in Asia Pacific might be moving at a slow pace, especially if you're looking at SDG 5 indicators. But the movement towards gender equality has definitely been in the region for a very long time. And I could give you more examples of how Asia Pacific were ahead of Western countries in many areas in relation to gender equality. And I think especially now that we're seeing youth who are being the key drivers of changes on gender equality. For instance, in successfully driving the movement forward, I think a particular strength that I've seen with the current youth generation, which I'm also part of, is the digital knowledge and skills of using digital platforms for advocacy on gender equality. Youth are using digital technologies to mobilize online campaigns, to raise awareness for gender transformative change, to discuss social inclusion issues, etc. But I've also seen, or it's been recorded or researched, that online platform can also very much be a double-edged sword for youth and for youth activism. And just to give an example of that, now during COVID-19, not only did we have an increase of reported cases of domestic violence, which is not just true for Asia Pacific, but that was a global phenomena. There was also an increase in online misogyny and hate speech against women, especially young women. So you can see that in the picture on the right side of the screen, which is from a research that my team did in the beginning of the pandemic on a couple of countries in South and Southeast Asia. So we saw just when the pandemic started that online posts and engagements with the posts, like sharing them, giving them a like, etc., that were misogynistic increased with 168% in the countries that we researched compared to the same time the last year. So that's a huge increase. At the same time, however, we also saw that youth, and that includes both girls and boys, or young women and young men, were taking the lead in combating online misogyny and fake news related to the COVID pandemic and certain measures, etc., reporting online sexual harassment that they saw online. So youth were very much and are still claiming their online space to be a place that's free of misogyny and hate speech and harassment of women. And another example of youth solidarity for women's rights that's taking place online, I had from a conversation I had with youth indigenous women's rights activist from the Philippines the other week. So she told me that the youth that they're working with are using social media to spread awareness of indigenous women's rights, to write about the violations that indigenous women and youth are facing, and also spreading the message of what type of help and support that they need. So by using social media, they have really been able to have a global audience. And having a global audience, having allies from cross borders, has been proven to be so important. And that, I think, might be especially true when there's youth advocacy done on topics that could be or are sensitive in their context. Because unfortunately, advocating for women's rights is not always free of risks. Youth that I met have expressed that, strong lobbyism or strong advocacy on some areas related to women's rights could even cause danger or be dangerous to themselves or the organizations that they're working for. So just like this indigenous rights activist told me, it's so important to find allies in other countries and regions, people who stand behind the same cause, many times also facing very similar issues as themselves, even though they're from a completely different part of the world, and also who can support their advocacy from a safer place and to spread the word. And with this, I'm not really trying to say that youth's only avenues for engagement is through social media. It's a bit of a cliche, and it's a very important platform, obviously. But my point is really that I've seen so much creativity and new thinking and really impressive network building skills among youth, especially when it comes to contributing to progress on gender equality and women's empowerment. And this really needs to be recognized. We can go to the next slide, please. So as some final words, I just want to give you a couple of recommendations. The first one, to widen your network, really speaks to what I just said. Many youth are actually facing similar issues. We sometimes tend to think that our issues are very unique or unique to our country, or that it looks very different in another country or in another region. And while the issues might be expressed differently, and while the justice system or the government system looks differently, many times we experience similar issues, or at least we want to support or see the same type of changes. Like Friday for Future that I mentioned before, we have really seen that the bigger the group is, the greater the impact is. So I think that's really a good way of moving forward, to find your allies, not only in your own cluster or in your own context, but also that goes beyond where you are active at the moment. Then secondly, it's also really important, I think, to work from a lens of intersectionality. And I think that this generation, which I'm proud to be part of, this generation of youth are particularly good at working with intersectionalities, which is very important. And I would think that this generation is a very aware generation, and that it's really important to understand our different privileges and our different marginalizations, different types of them. Like, how can I make sure to include the voices of those who are most marginalized, those in rural areas, those who are part of the LGBTQI+ community, people with disabilities, etc. So I think being a youth activist today comes with a certain level of responsibility of understanding intersectionalities. But youth today also have a particularly power, I think, of being aware and a very knowledgeable age group. And then lastly, don't forget you are the future leaders and parts, or even the drivers of solutions. I can hear how cliche that sounds, but I really wish you to continue having the courage to claim your space. I mean, youth have historically, and I think especially today, been the main drivers in terms of challenging status quo. So I would like to leave you with the hope of you continuing doing that, challenging what it is at the moment, so that we actually have a chance to make better progresses on gender equality. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fanny. Thank you, Fanny, and thank you, Siva. I think it is concerning to see the pace of progress with respect to gender equality, both globally and within our region, but it's also encouraging to hear narratives of how movement building and network building is being successful in being able to challenge the status quo and build momentum from ground up. And I think those recommendations would be really encouraging for for the youth advocates to hear as well. Thank you so much for sharing your reflections with us today. In the interest of time, I'm going to hand over to my co-moderator, Kesha, to introduce the youth panel.
Thanks, Arushi. So yes, as Arushi mentioned, now we'll move on to the youth solutions speakers for SDG 5. But before we hear from the three incredible youth speakers that we have today, I'll first introduce Arushi again, and Arushi will be giving us an overview of the recently launched SDG indicators, sorry, not SDG, SDG Gender Index for 2022. That's recently been launched by Equal Measures 2030. Momota, could I please get you to share the slide with Arushi's bio? Thank you so much. Yeah, so just a little background on Arushi. Arushi has a background in monitoring, evaluation, and research with a focus on gender. Previously, she has worked with donor research and bilateral organizations, managing portfolios that include projects around gender equality and reproductive health, especially. Prior to joining Arrow, she was also a research associate with the Packard Foundation. Arushi holds a master's degree in gender studies from the University of London. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Arushi. Arushi, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kesha. Hi, everyone. I'm Arushi. I'm the regional coordinator for the Asia region for the Equal Measures 2030 partnership. Arrow is an important member and an important driver of this partnership. And the Equal Measures 2030 partnership aims to provide gender advocates with easy to use data to integrate in their advocacy as they advocate for change with respect to gender equality. Now, I'll be spending the next 5 minutes talking to you about the new 2022 SDG Gender Index. Next slide, please. So the 2022 SDG Gender Index is the most comprehensive tool available to measure progress on gender equality within the SDG framework. The index is based on 56 indicators and covers 14 out of the 17 SDGs. The index captures data from 144 countries, 135 of which have data for 2 time points, which makes it possible to track progress on from the index for those countries between 2015 and 2020. The index is a very comprehensive tool and is very representative in how it covers 98% of the world's girls and women. And for the Asia Pacific region specifically, it includes 25 countries, which cover over 95% of women and girls in the region. So a lot of the data that I will be talking about through this presentation covers and represents a large proportion of women and girls, both globally and in the region. Next slide, please. So how is the SDG Gender Index different and why was it sort of created in the first place? The SDG Gender Index is unique in a way because it adds a gender lens across each of the goals, including the many that lack such a lens in the official framework or where no data are reported at present. So the index actually makes it possible for all of us to track progress on gender equality across all the SDGs, so across at least 14 out of 17 SDGs, in addition to SDG 5. So we know that there is one SDG which is specifically dedicated to gender equality, but the index enables us and helps us to track progress on gender equality across 14 of those SDGs. The gender index complements SDG indicators with a wide range of data sources to provide a timelier and more comprehensive picture of progress. This includes tracking of legal frameworks that address gender global survey data that capture women's views about their lives and their societies, and other data collections that are conducted by research organizations. So there are a range of credible data sources that have been incorporated in the index to provide a more comprehensive overview of progress with respect to gender equality. And the third most interesting aspect of the gender index is that it tracks progress over time. So it actually allows benchmarking since 2015 and provides insights into how gender indicators and gender equality is progressing towards the 2030 deadline. Next slide, please. So the index actually looks at progress in 2 ways. The first way actually captures the overall country level progress on a certain goal, which is graded on a 5-point scale, which is from very poor to poor, fair, good, and then very good at the other extreme. And the second way of looking at the index results is to look at the pace of change or a country's progress graded on a 4-point scale, which is fast progress, some progress, no progress, and decline. So when we look at a particular index data, we can see progress both in terms of where the country stands with respect to the score on the index, and then what is the progress of change and the pace of progress that's happening with respect to that particular goal or with respect to that particular country. Next slide, please. So what does the index tell us? So the 2022 SDG Gender Index sounds the alarm on gender equality, revealing that the global progress has been slow and marginal at best. And this we heard from our earlier panelists as well. So even before COVID-19 hit, less than a quarter of countries were making fast progress, while a third were making no progress. And worse still, there are several countries that are actually moving in the wrong direction, which is a cause of concern for all of us as advocates. Next slide, please. Zooming in on the region, findings from the Asia Pacific region actually show that we are making progress. It's happening far too slowly. With an average index score of 67.7, the Asia Pacific region has only seen some progress on gender equality, with just an increase of 2 points between 2015 and 20. Between 2015 and 2020. Countries like Nepal, Tajikistan, and Cambodia have actually been at sort of the peak of leading a lot of this progress that has happened in between 2015 and 2020. The region's progress has also been significantly driven by the penetration of technology, with an increase in women's access to internet, as well as greater use of digital banking. Next slide, please. So what we have here is a very interesting visual that places the 25 countries from the region that the index covers. And if we look specifically on sort of goal 5 in this index, in this visual, we'd be able to see that New Zealand is sort of at the apex of sort of the progress chart, with the blue dot here, which is signifying that it's got a very good score with respect to the SDG Gender Index, and the sort of the double arrow here indicating that it's also making very fast progress. If we look down, we'll see a majority of the countries here are sort of faring within the poor, the fair category with respect to the index. But what's encouraging to note is that there are several countries here that are actually making very fast progress, despite being in sort of the lower strung with respect to the average score. But the pace of progress is very fast, which is also an important sort of narrative, an important story that we need to take back. So if we see Malaysia, Thailand, even though they fare in sort of the fair and the poor category with respect to the index, the pace of progress is fast, which is an encouraging thing and a positive sort of story for us to note. Next slide, please. So this is another visual here, which actually indicates that there are dramatic intra-regional gaps for us to consider as we look at progress at an Asia Pacific level. And this particular visual basically highlights progress on the SDG Gender Index for each of the SDGs. But if we look at specifically on SDG 5 for New Zealand and Bangladesh, and we can see that there is a dramatic sort of gap between the two countries. So it's important to also note that there are sort of dramatic inter-regional gaps that exist with respect to progress on gender equality among countries within the region. So these are the kind of visuals that you can actually access. Go ahead, download, access, fill in sort of for your own specific country as well. And these are available on the Equal Measures 2030 website. So I would encourage all of you to after this presentation, to go to the website, play around with the visuals, look at data for your own country, for the region, and compare it with sort of the global averages as well. Next slide, please. So on the website, we also have a very detailed report that was written in collaboration with a range of partners across the globe, including Arrow. And this report essentially provides a detailed analysis by sort of the regions on progress with respect to gender equality based on the SDG Gender Index data. But what it also does, interestingly, is it provides a very detailed description of findings across goals, as well as a blueprint for change, which is based on the themes that characterize the regions and the countries that are making fast progress in gender equality. So we looked at countries that were making fast progress, and we identified what are some of the key drivers that are sort of driving this progress. And we've identified sort of a blueprint for change that we as advocates can sort of look to and adhere to in advocating for gender equality in our region. So I would urge you to go to the website and also read through the report and look at the blueprint for change. Next slide, please. So this is the link to the website. Please do feel free to venture there, read the report, and look at the data and use that in your advocacy. Thank you so much. I would now like to pass the mic on to my colleague Kesha. Kesha is a program officer at Arrow and is a part of the communications team and manages Arrow's website and online resource center, including the e-newsletter and social media. She's the regional coordinator for the Asia Network to End Female Genital Mutilation Cutting, a platform that aims to build stronger relationships and collaboration between organizations, activists, and researchers working to end FGMC across Asia. Kesha will be providing us with insights around on sort of progress with respect to ending the practice of FGMC in the country and key recommendations and with respect to the same. Over to you, Kesha.
Thanks, Arushi. Yeah, so as Arushi mentioned, I will be zooming in on SDG indicator 5.3 specifically. And this relates to eliminating all harmful practices such as child, early and forced marriage and female genital mutilation. Next slide, please. Okay, so harmful practices like child marriage and FGM disproportionately affect women and girls globally and also in Asia. When we're looking at the SDG indicators, there are two indicators which are relevant to FGM and child marriage, and that is indicator 5.3.1, which relates to the prevalence of women aged 20 to 24 years who were married or in a union before age 15 and before age 18. And for FGMC, we have indicator 5.3.2, which is the proportion of women and girls between 15 to 49 years who have undergone some form of female genital mutilation or cutting, which is FGMC. So these indicators identified as part of this target actually focus on understanding the prevalence rates for child, early and forced marriage and female genital mutilation or cutting. We know that the SDG agenda, we've heard about it from the other speakers as well. It recognizes the grave impact of such harmful practices and calls for the elimination of these practices by 2030. But as we have heard from Arushi, from Siva and from Fanny as well, progress on these issues in the region have not been very encouraging so far. And, Siva has also shared earlier that crisis always exacerbates gender equality. And because of the COVID-19 crisis, UNFPA has actually reported that an additional 13 million child marriages and an additional 2 million cases of FGMC will actually need to be averted if we are to meet Agenda 2030. Next slide, please. So if we are focusing on child marriage, just to give you a snapshot, as defined, in the CRC, we know that child marriage is any marriage that occurs before the age of 18. And early marriage continues to be a feature in the lives of adolescent girls in this region, especially those who are from poorer, lesser educated backgrounds, living in more vulnerable conditions. Being married off at an early age really impacts the physical, social, emotional, and economic development of girls. It can interrupt their schooling, and this will in turn affect their economic opportunities. It also exposes them to the risk of early pregnancy, STIs, HIV, and intimate partner violence as well, leaving them highly vulnerable because we know that usually these young girls are married off to partners who are much older. And that means that there's also this issue of an unequal power relations between inside the relationship and within the marriage as well. Often in these situations, there is no formal or informal consent that's given by the girl who's getting married. Most of the time, the parents or the male members of the family feel that they have control over the decisions regarding a girl's well-being, regarding her body, and this includes when and who she gets married to. And younger girls who marry at an early age, they often have very negligible sexual experience, they have lesser information, they have no autonomy, and they have very little negotiating power within the relationships. And one of the key barriers we can see that is actually hindering the how we address child marriage, or hindering the elimination of child marriage in this region, is the lack of enforcement, especially on the legal age of marriage in the region. On the overall, the age of marriage for girls is lower, and this itself speaks of gender bias and the belief that, you know, girls would eventually have to marry, so enabling them to marry sooner seems to be acceptable. And all countries have laws in place that articulates the minimum age at marriage. But in every single country in this region, there is also a range of intersecting civil and religious laws that actually provide exemptions or loopholes in regards to the legal age of marriage. And in most instances, the age set by the civil law is not harmonized with the age set by parallel legal systems, such as religious courts that may preside over marriages for specific communities. So this just means that some girls in a country are more vulnerable than others to being child brides simply by virtue of belonging to a community where marriage of minors is allowed by religious courts. And in some countries, what they need is only permission from a parent, most often the father or male guardian, or even just a religious official, in order to legalize marriage to a young girl. So we can really see that there are multiple layers of vulnerabilities also that are faced by girls in this region in terms of child marriage. And as you can see here, the practice of child, early and forced marriage has declined in the region, but the pace of decline is slow and it is uneven. Next slide, please. In the next slide, we can see some statistics here from the region, and we can see that South Asia has the highest number of child brides. From these statistics here, you can see Bangladesh has 49%, India 47%, Nepal 37%, and Bangladesh and India are actually amongst the top 10 countries that have the highest rate of child marriage before 15 years of age. The statistic earlier was for child marriage before 18, and before 15, it's also very, very high. Although the practice is very rampant in the South Asia sub-region, this sub-region has also witnessed the largest decline in child marriage because the number of at-risk girls has dropped. The progress in India has played a significant role in these reduced numbers because there has been proactive investment by the government on adolescent education, and there's been very effective awareness building campaigns as well around the illegality of child marriage. And this has contributed significantly to this reduction. But while the rate has dropped, if we look at a 10-year period, for example, in 2005, 2006, it was 47%. In 2015 to 2016, it has reduced to 27%. So while there is that reduction, the current prevalence level is still very, very high. Next slide, please. So now we will look at FGMC in Asia. And FGMC is described by WHO as all procedures that involve the partial or the total removal of the external female genitalia or any other injury to the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. And across Asia, FGMC is documented in about 12 to 13 countries. But out of these 12 to 13 countries, it is really alarming that only 2 countries so far have nationally representative data on the prevalence of FGMC. And these are Indonesia and the Maldives. So we can really see that there is a lack of data. There's also some statistics there. Globally, 4.1 million girls are cut every year. And due to just population growth alone, without taking into account the impacts of COVID and things like that, just due to population growth, by 2030, this number will increase to 4.6 million girls. undergoing FGMC every year. And out of this 4.6 million, over 1 million will come from Asia. So we can really see that this is a severe issue that is happening in Asia, but we have a lack of data. All we have is small scale studies in certain countries, but not nationally representative data. And studies have shown that the majority of girls are also being cut younger and younger. So for example, in India, they are cut at the age of 7, in Maldives under the age of 5, in Malaysia before their first birthday, and in Indonesia at less than 6 months old, girls undergo some form of FGMC. Next slide, please. So these are the types of FGMC. There are 4 types, type 1 to type 4. And across Asia, the most common are type 1 and type 4. Could we go to the next slide, please? That shows type 4. Yeah. So type 1 earlier is usually when what is removed is the clitoral hood or the external part of the clitoris. And this usually occurs within the Bora communities in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. And the most common form is type 4, as you can see there, where it says any other injury to the organ. So this will be either pricking or nicking or burning or cutting or just injuring that area. And this is the most prevalent type of FGMC that's practiced in all the countries in Asia. And this has also led to the belief, because type 1 and type 4 are considered to be less severe than type 2 and type 3 FGMC, it has unfortunately led to the belief that the FGMC practiced in Asia is not the same as ones practiced in maybe regions like Africa, where it is much more severe. But the reality is that all types of FGMC are equally as invasive, all the types. Yeah. Next slide, please. So this is just some data from Indonesia. Nearly half of girls under the age of 12 have undergone some form of FGMC. In Indonesia, the nationally representative data was collected in 2013, and in Maldives, it was only collected in 2019 under the DHS survey. Across Asia, it is mostly carried out, or it used to be mostly carried out by traditional practitioners, FGMC. But over the years, the procedure is increasingly being conducted by medical practitioners in health facilities. And this has given rise to medicalized FGMC, which is FGMC carried out by a healthcare worker or professional in any location, but most of the time within health facilities. And in some countries like Indonesia, medicalized FGMC is also offered or even just performed as part of a package of services for newborn babies in health facilities. Next slide, please. So despite evidence on the practice of FGM in these countries, governments have completely denied its prevalence, leading to a complete absence of discussion and reporting on indicator 5.3.2. Why does FGMC occur? It is mostly influenced by religion and culture, as well as very harmful and discriminatory gender norms, which play a part in sustaining the practice. Across Asia, it is mostly practiced by the Muslim community. So there are fatwas and guidance by Islamic clerics and organizations in certain countries that have actually encouraged religious justification for the practice. But it is really crucial to note that there is no religious basis for the practice, and it is not mentioned in the Quran even. And in some communities, it is also practiced because it's believed that cutting a girl will stop her from becoming wild or promiscuous. And this is where the culture comes in. And it really shows us that this is how we view sexuality, only to be expressed within the framework of marriage. And that's why, FGMC is really about controlling women and girls' bodies and sexuality and curbing or curtailing their bodily autonomy, and of course, the right to decide for themselves. Because as I mentioned earlier, this occurs on young girls, on babies who are not able to provide informed consent to this procedure. Just like child marriage, there is no consent involved as well. And in terms of medicalized FGMC, this is a key barrier because there is a very common misperception that the practice will not be harmful if it is carried out by a medical professional, just because they may be trained, they are more skilled, they have the equipment and things like that. But in reality, FGMC can have serious risks and immediate and lifelong health consequences, regardless of where it is carried out and regardless of how skilled the practitioner may be. Next slide, please. So how do we move forward from this? Next slide, please. So firstly, we need to acknowledge that child marriage and FGMC are violations of human rights, especially sexual and reproductive health and rights. And it is an issue that demands, a united stand. It demands prioritization. Governments in the region need to fully implement SDG 5 targets and indicators at the country level, especially. And this involves allocating adequate budgets, planning evidence-based national action plans, and also ensuring that there are regular monitoring mechanisms in place for gender equality laws, regulations, policies, and its full implementation. And most governments in the region have ratified both the CEDAW and the CRC. So this means that they do have duties under international law to implement concrete legislative policy and programmatic measures to fully eliminate these harmful practices. Of course, there also needs to be a lot of awareness raising and perspective development, as well as education and sensitization at the community level. And this also involves engaging key stakeholders like parents, influential community leaders, religious leaders, even medical practitioners, if we're talking about eliminating the medicalization of FGMC. Another thing is to ensure community-based programming that aims to dismantle patriarchal biases and empower women and girls. We also need to ensure that laws around eliminating harmful practices are in place and are implemented, and all discriminatory laws and parallel legal systems, like I mentioned earlier, the loopholes, the exemptions must be repealed. And of course, one important aspect is research and evidence generation, especially if we are talking about FGMC. For child marriage, we do have a lot of evidence, but for FGMC, that is really lacking. So we really need research to strengthen the evidence base, because only with evidence can we have effective advocacy. Next slide, please. I just wanted to end by introducing all of you to the Asia Network to End FGMC, which Arrow co-convenes along with our partner Orchid Project, which is a global NGO based in the UK. Now, the Asia Network to End FGMC is a platform of activists. We have, civil society, social actors. We also have religious leaders, medical professionals, allies who are interested in eliminating the practice of FGMC and tackling this issue. We focus on evidence generation, awareness raising, and of course, really holding governments to account for the commitments that they have made. As I mentioned earlier, that they have ratified all these international commitments at these international conventions, and yet not much is being done on these two indicators. So I wanted to introduce all of you to the Asia Network. We do realize that youth and youth engagement is really important in tackling this issue as well. I would like to invite all of you to visit our website. The link is there, but I'll also post it in the chat box later. So you can, www.ndfgmcasia.org is our website. Please visit it. And if you would like to be involved in the Asia Network, please do join as a member. You will find the link, become a member link on our website as well. Next slide, please. I wanted to end by also sharing that, yes, okay. I wanted to end by also sharing that the Asia Network has just created a new issue brief on FGMC. This gives an overview of FGMC in Asia. As I mentioned earlier, its drivers, the gaps and challenges that we have, as well as recommendations on how we can improve the situation and tackle the issue. The issue brief is available for all of you to download and read on ARRO's website. And Farah will be posting the link to the issue brief in the chat box. So if you'd like to read it, you can click on that link, and please do share it around as well. Thank you very much. Okay, so that brings me to the end of my presentation. I will now like to start with the youth speakers, the youth solution speakers that we have. And firstly, it gives me great pleasure to welcome our first youth speaker, Bandana. Bandana is an attorney at law with a specialization in human rights. She has worked as a research assistant, a legal aid attorney, and a teaching assistant at the Kathmandu School of Law. She's currently working as a junior legal analyst at Nepal for Pro Bono. Her work mainly revolves around advocacy for economic, social, cultural rights as guaranteed in the Constitution. She is equally interested in activism and advocacy of securing SRHR through institutional and legal mechanisms. So now, without further ado, I'd like to invite Bandana to share her experiences. Go ahead, Bandana.
Thanks, Keisha. So I'm mindful of the time I've been provided with, so which is around 5 minutes. So without further ado, I'd like to move forward with the 2 questions which I have been asked to prepare for. The first question being, what are the challenges and forms of discrimination faced by women and girls in Nepal? So in regards to that, there are many challenges and forms of discrimination faced by women here in Nepal, which is somewhat similar to all the challenges and forms of discrimination around the world. However, I'd like to start with a note that many women face multiple forms of discrimination in addition to gender, including related to age, class, caste, geography, language, religion, and sexual orientation. So to briefly talk about the challenges women in Nepal face, the first is the gender-based discrimination, which is faith-based, embedded with the fear of myth and mythologies. For example, requiring a male children to perform death-related rituals, which would obviously increase the need or the want for a male child. So another problem in Nepal would be child marriage. Nepal has the 3rd largest rate of child marriage in Asia after Bangladesh and India. Similarly, the poverty and the dowry system contributed to the early marriage of the girls, who are often seen as the economic burden by the family. The dowry system is rooted in gender inequality and encourages violence against women and girls. Likewise, there are some certain traditional harmful practices which are currently practiced here in Nepal that are notably related to menstruation and childbirth. For instance, I'd like to name Chaupadi, which is a practice in Western Nepal where women and girls are excluded from normal family activities during menstruation. So menstruation is still a taboo almost all over the Nepal and not just on a specific region. We are not allowed to go into the kitchen or cook food when we are menstruating. Similarly, there are certain things where we can't see our male family members when we are menstruating. So there is a big taboo surrounding the issue of menstruation and even pregnancy. So apart from that, the patriarchal system treats women as belonging to the domestic domain and men as the main breadwinners. So men have the right to hold most of the property, including lands and houses. I mean, Nepal recently, back in 5 or 6 years, introduced a law where if the property were licensed or registered in name of the females, then there would be certain concessions or the legal fees would be exempted. So there are increasing trend where the property are being registered in the name of women, but then the actual ownership is not with them because the decision will again be taken by the male members of the family. So this is often considered as a symbol of status within the male members, and provide the male members with a sense of economic security and bargaining strength in economic transactions. So such barriers keep women from right to property and opportunities for education, health, marriage, reproductive rights, mobility, livelihoods, etc. So apart from that, there is also this notion which the previous speakers have also spoken, considering the unequal power relations as well. Women are often considered or taken as someone who is just a follower. So she will not be giving any important inputs, but rather would only be following the decisions which are already taken by the men within the business houses. So it is not only in the private sector, but also the same in the government sectors. So apart from that, there is obviously various issues spoken by previous presenters, such as climate change and its impact on women are vulnerable when there are impacts of change. Often are the ones who go to collect water, and with the snow caps melting, there would be shortage of water springs within the near area of their houses. So the women are thus being more affected by these situations of climate change as well. Based on the Global Development Report data for Nepal from 1995 to 2018, along with calculations for the present 2020 report in human development, the gender inequality index value fell from 0.71 in 1995 to 0.48 in 2015, a decrease of 31%. Since 2015, the GII score has remained fairly stagnant at around 0.479. So at present as well, Nepal is the 150th out of the 162 countries. The score of 0.4 is that of Yemen, 0.834, and the highest score is that of Switzerland, 0.037. Similarly, Nepal is ahead of all South Asian countries except Bhutan, the Maldives, and Sri Lanka in terms of lower gender equality in human development. Nepal's female share of seat in parliament is among the highest in South Asia. It's significantly lagged behind, however, in its maternal mortality ratio, fertility rate, and percentage of adult females with secondary education. Nepal's GII is below the average for countries in South Asia, and those in the medium human development group, reflecting its better position in terms of overall gender inequality. So those are the major challenges which I would like to mention. Now moving forward to the next question, the second question, which was, imagine you are sitting in front of a policymaker. What is one thing that you would like to ask of them in order to improve the situation of women and girls in your country's context? So when I come to think of it, I believe that there are two major, there are interventions required in two major things. The first one would be regarding the citizenship in the name of the mother, and then another one would be protection and access of SRHR, sexual rights and health of the Nepalese. So many of you might be familiar with the issue of citizenship in the name of mother. There are still legal as well as institutional dilemmas on a child getting citizenship in the name of their mother. So there's been this huge movement around this, where most of the feminists, along with us youths, have stated that citizenship needs to be provided in the name of mother as well, because most of the children of, for instance, divorced or who have already left their partners, then there is a situation of statelessness for those children. So there is a movement going on around where we are collectively advocating for providing citizenship in the name of mother. Likewise, another issue I'd like to point out to the policymakers would be that of SRHR. The access and protection including the legal as well as institutional protection, is a must if we really want to improve the situation of women and girls in our country. So like the issue of menstruation and the issue of childbirth, the issue of SRHR is not openly spoken about. So we can't say that we need to advocate for abortion or we need to talk about the SRHR because it is a taboo here in Nepal. So those are the two interventions I would put forward if I was sitting in front of a policymaker. In this context, I'd like to mention a brief about the recent case we filed at the Supreme Court here in Nepal. So that was the writ petition regarding the SRHR rights, its protection regarding the amendment of the present legislation. So what we have asked is the decriminalization of abortion, where we are asking that no woman should be imprisoned simply because she practiced abortion. And also, there are certain conditions provided for abortion here in Nepal. So we have recently filed a writ petition in that regards as well. It is registered in front of the Constitutional Bench, where 5 presiding judges of the Supreme Court, including the Chief Justice of Nepal, will be hearing about the issue. So our next date is for March 30th, 10 days from today. So we are hoping for a change from that case as well. So that's all from my end regarding these two questions. I would now like to pass on the mic to my fellow advocate Saro. Saro is a young transgender activist and social entrepreneur for the socio-economic development of marginalized communities. She's been working in the field of transgender rights, SRHR, and development since 2013. She has worked with various national and international organizations like YouthLead, IYAFP, FP 2030, Global Fund for Children, Commonwealth Youth Network for Gender Equality, Youth Voice Count, Accountability Lab, etc. So my two questions for Saro are: one, what are some of the barriers that deter the participation of sexual and gender minorities, especially young people in Pakistan? And second, imagine you are sitting in front of a policymaker. What is one thing that you would like to ask of them in order to improve?
Hello, I'm Salim Imran from Pakistan, and I believe that the major issues or problems due to which the transgender community is not able to meaningfully engage in the youth development initiatives is because majority of the population are yet to reach because they lived in the semi-urban or rural areas, and number second is they don't have access to right information. So I believe that we need to develop a structure and intervention that involves all the marginalized communities and covers all the geographical areas so that no one should left behind. If I'm sitting with a policymaker and if I have a power to influence on one thing, that will be to economically empower the transgender people, because majority of the human rights violations happening on transgender people is due to the fact they are financially or economically dependent on their abusers or engaged in risky livelihoods. We need to empower the marginalized communities economically so they can be sustainably developed and grow themselves as a role model. Hello, I'm Saro Imran from Pakistan.
Thank you, Mamata, for playing Saro's video. So that was Saro's video intervention, as she's not able to join us today. Next, I'd like to call upon the last youth speaker for this session, Manisha Hada. Manisha is also from Nepal. She's a public health graduate, and she's been working in the field of SRHR advocacy on menstrual health, women's health, safe abortion, and many more issues. She's currently working as a program lead at Swasta Nari, and she's a youth champion at Visible Impact and Yoshan as well. Manisha believes to see the change, we have to be a part of change. Go ahead, Manisha.
Thank you so much, Tisha. Hello, everyone. Firstly, I'm very delighted to share the platform among all the young leaders working towards sustainable development. I will be talking about two things today, why technology is important for young people's empowerment, and secondly, what would I suggest to the policymakers to ensure young people's right to information and technology. Next slide, please. How technology can be used to empower the young people. Firstly, all of us had heard the list of benefits that technology had but the pandemic. But with the pandemic, it even seems more clear to us because with COVID, everything shifted to the online world and there was a virtual spaces going along with the real world. Researchers around find that the responses to COVID-19 have speeded the adoption of digital technologies by several years, and it is still gonna be remain for the long time. During COVID-19, we had experienced several adoption of the technologies. For example, many educational institutions conducted online classes to ensure that pandemic doesn't disrupt education. Many organizations shifted towards working remotely so that the progress they had made doesn't stop. And telemedicine was also strengthened so that people could at least have access to primary healthcare. But above all, the question remains, was this information, communication, and technology was utilized to empower youths? Were these spaces was inclusive, or were these spaces utilized to ensure access to information? It's very critical. Next slide, please. It's very critical that youths have the necessary training in digital literacy to have digital skills to maximize these opportunities, because ICTs are a must in today's labor market, and youths need to have them not only to increase the academic capacity, but also to open career opportunities that could uplift the economic condition during the pandemic, especially in long run. Secondly, technology can be used to amplify the voices and strengthen the networks. And one of the example is this forum where we are talking about where all the youths around the world, especially the Asian and Pacific region, are gathered to talk about SDG goals, the progress we have made, and to strengthen our networks to amplify the voices towards sustainable development. ICTs can engage and motivate youths to get involved in developing and learning about the community's issues, and thus force increased commitment and empowerment. Often, people learn about an issue, get motivated to help, sign a petition, or even donate to a cause after reading an article friend shared on the social media. Thanks to technology, many of us youth activists today can share our stories, which in return can be exemplary for other youths to keep up their voices. And lastly, technology can be used to solve the youth issues, because youth issues requires youth solutions. Taking of my own example, during pandemic, when the SRHR, especially antenatal checkup visits, was stopped due to COVID pandemic, at that time, Sustanari proposed tech solutions named ANC Tracker, Antenatal Tracker, where to ensure that health professionals remotely through the means of technology reach out to the young pregnant women, especially in the rural areas, so that their antenatal visits are not missed out during the pandemic. So with this, what I want to propose is that youth issues requires youth solutions, and for that youth involvement and youth access to ICT is important. And next slide, please. Addressing to the second question, that one thing that policymakers need to prioritize to ensure young people's right to information and technology is addressing a digital dividend. There is still a huge digital dividend prevalent in the developing countries like Nepal, whether it's the geographic dividend, gender dividend, or wealth quintile dividend, where in one hand, rural people are unable to access information and technology due to the lack of internet access to their places, while in other hand, young girls and women are unable to access the right to information and technology because they do not have ownership over the technology like mobile phones. So for this, all the policymakers need to prioritize broad digital development agendas beyond connectivity that includes inclusivity, especially prioritizing youth with diversities like rural youths, young people with disabilities, migrant and refugees, LGBTI young people, young women and girls, etc., and many more. Because only the connectivity won't solve the problems which has persisted for decades. So along with the connectivity, policymakers need to invest in young people to strengthen their digital literacy and critical thinking skills, along with the incorporation of ICT in educational curriculum, so that they create an enabling business environment where technology can root fast. So before young people could enjoy their right to information and technology, governments should create an enabling environment so that youths can enjoy those rights properly at the first hand. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Manisha, for sharing your experiences, especially on how technology can be leveraged in a crisis, like in a health crisis such as COVID-19. So thank you very much to all our youth speakers for this session, Manisha, Bandana, as well as Saro, who joined us via video recording. In the interest of time, we unfortunately will not have time for a question and answer session, but I do see some very interesting conversations happening in the chat. So please do continue having these conversations. And once again, I'd like to thank all our youth speakers, as well as Arushi as well from Arrow, and also Siva and Fanny for sharing their insights as well in this session.